This is All Ships Follow Me by Mieke Eerkens. Chapter 5. Independence and Displacement. Samarang, Dutch Indies, 1945. In October, British troops arrive in the Dutch East Indies. Because the atomic bombs had ended World War II so suddenly, the Allies struggled to move a sufficient number of their own forces quickly enough to replace the Japanese troops, who still occupy a large area of Southeast Asia. British General Louis Mountbatten, who commands the Allied Southeast Asian forces, is tasked with retaking the Dutch East Indies from Japanese forces, who've been attempting to maintain the peace in this new conflict of shifting alliances and obey the orders of the Allied forces to keep the Dutch and Indonesian citizens safe. The Netherlands, which has just been liberated from Hitler's devastating occupation, does not have enough time to reorganize or train a task force to relieve the Japanese in the Dutch East Indies. So the job falls to Mountbatten and his British troops. Even with seasoned troops under his command, however, it takes Mountbatten a few months to organize transports for his men from India to Burma to the Indonesian archipelago. During this long interim in this relative vacuum of power, Sukarno and the Indonesian fighters gain momentum in their fight for independence. When Mountbatten's troops finally arrive in Samarang in October, rather than merely take over organization of the recovery effort as expected, they are thrown directly into battle. At the Van Deventer School, a thrilled Sheffy watches the arrival of the British troops, many of whom are Indian Sikhs and Nepalese Gurkhas from Britain's own colonies. When these men get sick or injured, some of them show up at my grandfather's medical clinic at the orphanage, asking for treatment. One afternoon, Sheffy walks into the living room to find a tall Sikh with an elaborate uniform and an impressive turban waiting for my father. Sheffy's eyes widen when he sees the pineapple-shaped hand grenade hanging from the man's belt. Now 14 years old and bolder than he once was, he asks, "Excuse me, is that a real grenade?" "Yes," says the Sikh. "Is it dangerous to carry that inside a house?" asks Sheffy. "No, young man. See?" The soldier loosens the grenade from his belt and holds it in his hand with the explosive timing release pin held down by his middle finger. At that moment, Sheffy's mother enters the room and blanches. "Yes, please, sir, please put that away." The man grins as he puts the grenade back on his belt and winks at my father. General Mountbatten's troops quickly lift martial law and initially relax their focus on the Palapur movements while they help organize the Japanese soldiers to facilitate their transfer home to Japan. Lady Mountbatten, the general's wife, tours Java to survey the camps and their survivors. Her photos are some of the only ones that document the camps and the medical condition of the survivors immediately after the war. Viewing those photos on the internet, I scroll through images of emaciated ex-prisoners of war lying in hospital beds. It gives me some access that I can't get through my father's stories alone. Seeing these people's bodies makes his experience more palatable. Within 3 weeks of the arrival of the British troops, a second insurrection of Sukarno's men takes place, and again they occupy large parts of Samarang. By this time, they are more prepared and have better weapons. The Van Deventer School is now guarded by British soldiers instead of Japanese, and the Indonesian Palapurs take up positions in the treed foothills behind the school that overlook Samarang. Many families are not as lucky as my father's family. They don't have soldiers guarding them. On the first night of the second uprising, the Palapurs sweep through houses and murder Dutch and mixed Indo-civilians who have made the mistake of returning to their old homes in the suburbs of Samarang. In response to the new uprising, the British position a battleship at the entrance of Samarang's harbor and start to bomb the hills behind Sheffy's house at the Van Deventer School with cannon-fired heavy missiles. Sheffy looks up at the sky and sees the missiles fly overhead, exploding with a thunderous noise in the trees behind the school. It quickly becomes very clear that the Dutch and Indo ex-tyrannies are not safe, and a plan needs to be formulated to get them out. At this point, not all the camps have been completely cleared of internees, many of whom no longer have homes, jobs, or money. In Samarang, the camps are protected by the British troops, but there are several additional camps inland, and that are so much more rural. With several thousand Dutch internees still in residence, they have very few guards. During this second uprising, the Palapors decide to overtake those camps and eliminate the occupants. Trucks with armed Palapors arrive at the gate of one such camp, Camp Ambermarwa, demanding to see the Dutch camp administrator. As the Japanese camp administrator has already been sent home by the British, the Palapors tell them approximately 600 women and children still living in the Ambermarwa camp to congregate immediately at the center of the camp for an important announcement. Then the Palapors yell, "Merdeka! Freedom!" and throw hand grenades into the crowd. At that moment, those left standing hear the indisputable sound of tank crawling down the gate. Armed British Sikhs jump out of a truck behind the tank and run toward the Palapors, shooting their guns into the air as a warning. The Palapors turn and run, with most of them managing to escape. However, they leave a bloody scene in the camp clearing. About 50 women and children have been killed or wounded by the hand grenades. Some of the British Sikhs try to do triage, as others quickly call for backup. It's clear that the situation is out of control, and the former internees are not safe. All the Ambermarwa survivors are evacuated, along with the former internees at several other inland camps. But now there are hundreds of evacuated internees in trucks, nowhere to bring them. About 50 of these Ambermarwa survivors are brought to the Van Venter School, where they sleep in the gymnasium, choking up over the cups of tea held in their trembling hands. They tell Shafi and his family about the traumatic experience that they had just been through. Shell-shocked and grief-stricken over the loss of the family members and campmates that they have just seen blown apart after surviving for years in the prison camps. Shafi and his family don't stay in the Van Deventer School much longer. The British forces and Red Cross immediately begin evacuating European and Indo people on every military battleship and plane that they call to the Samarang harbor for an emergency rescue mission. As soon as they gain partial control of the city again, they begin to move women, children, and civilian males out of Java in trucks with military escorts. The ships take as many refugees as possible to Australia and Ceylon, Sri Lanka. In eastern and western Java, people are also evacuated from Java's two other main ports in Surabaya and Batavia. Shafi and his family are among the last internees to be evacuated from Samarang, as Shafi's father is under orders to stay at a station at the Van Denver school until most civilians have been evacuated. Then Shafi says goodbye to his bedroom and the living room and the little house. He says goodbye to the Van Deventer school and climbs onto the bed of a military truck. As the truck moves towards the harbor, he says goodbye to the Tangi Hills, goodbye to the jasmine, the orchids, and the banana trees, goodbye to the chickas and geckos, the sugar cane and the coffee plantations, goodbye to Mount Ungaran in the distance, snaking down past Camp Lampasari and Camp Bangkok in the distance. He says goodbye. And then he is boarding a huge ship in the harbor, and he says goodbye to Samarang as it slides from view, and then to Java, and then to the whole of Indonesia, the only home he has ever known. Columns of smoke rising in scattered spots on the island, which recedes behind the churning water in a strip shore of monkeys and mango trees that thin and flatten before becoming one of the horizon and vanishing entirely from view. It is December 25th, Christmas Day. Samarang, Indonesia, 2014. It's hard to calculate how many people died during this Bersiap, this violent period immediately following the war. Among the Indonesian rebel fighters, the estimate is anywhere between 20,000 and 100,000, depending on the source. The British and British Indian Relief Forces lost around 650 troops, with a further 320 permanently missing. The Japanese army fighting the rebels lost 402 in this conflict, with 88 missing. The mixed Dutch-Indonesian victims of the Bersiap was estimated at around 20,000, with 3,500 confirmed dead, and the rest kidnapped and presumed dead. Their bodies never recovered, though mass graves were reportedly seen by soldiers at the time. Chinese Indonesians outside the camps lost hundreds of lives as well, in what is considered a shameful period of Dutch history in the Netherlands. After the Dutch was evacuated from Indonesia, the Dutch army returned to try and win back its lost colony. It fought for 3 more years during this War of Independence, leading to enormous bloodshed and recently discovered atrocities on the part of the Dutch fighters against the Indonesian people. Ultimately, the Dutch government had to accept that the Dutch East Indies would be no more, and that after hundreds of years, Indonesia would never again be a colony of the Netherlands. In December 1949, the Dutch transferred sovereignty to the Republic of Indonesia. With the transfer, a huge wave of remaining mixed Indo-European people immigrated to Europe, no longer feeling there was a place for them in the new republic. Even if they had survived the targeted attacks during the Bersiap period, there was Indo people in Europe today who still feel an intense amount of pain over having to be forced to abandon the heritage of their Indonesian parent. They speak of a sense of rejection and a schism in identity due to their mixed race and expulsion from Indonesia. As Jocko drives us on submarine from the Deventer School in the Taji Hills, we pass the church on the hill that my father almost burnt down as a young boy. I imagine the fire surrounding him and chasing him from the hill, the unstoppable advancing force, and how this was a foreshadowing of years later when he would flee the same hills, escaping from rebel fighters. We pass the memorial cemetery and the thousands of white crosses that represent the souls that rest there into eternity, those left behind. I feel an odd sense of abandonment myself as we pass them in Jocko's van. When this trip is over, I will go back to the United States where my friends and family wait. My father will go back to his couch and his favorite blanket and will push the numbers he loves around on his papers. These crosses will stand there then, with no visitors, or maybe only 1 or 2 visitors a month, in monsoon and the glaring sun, in a grass plot in the middle of a city of people who forgot who they were. Java Sea, Indonesia, Christmas, 1945. Sheffy stares out over the billowing waves of the Java Sea from the deck of the HMS Princess Beatrix, a former passenger ship that was converted into a Dutch troop transport ship during World War II. Sorry, I'm falling off my seat again. Sorry. But to what he is en route remains unclear. Everything has happened so quickly. Left behind in Indonesia are the remnants of the only life he's known, and once again Sheffy finds himself in a liminal space and no sense of where his place in the world is. The authorities call it repatriation, but that word feels wrong for people who never lived in the Netherlands. Repatriation of the great-great-great-great-grandchildren of the first colonists, perhaps. It takes 5 days to travel to the Red Cross refugee camp in Ceylon. When the refugees disembark in the Ceylon's main harbor, Colombo, they are taken by train to the inland city of Kandy, and from there by trucks to a nearby temporary displaced persons camp, formerly used by General Mountbatten for his housing his troops. There are already thousands of Dutch refugees there, as several shiploads of people from Java has preceded them. With their arrival on the last ship, the total head count of Camp Kandy swells to around 5,000. Sheffy's father, who is still officially employed as a military doctor, is appointed co-administrator and hospital director of the Kandy refugee camp by the Dutch government. Sheffy thinks of all his friends from Lampersary and Bangkok who just happened to be loaded into the evacuation ships headed to Australia. They never even got to say goodbye. At this point in his life, he knows better than to become attached to people, but it's still difficult for him to wrap his mind around the idea that he will never see them again. The family is in this Camp Kandy for about 4 months. 14-year-old Sheffy and his elder sister Jordy, now at 13, attend an official government licensed Dutch school run by ex-interned teachers, while their little sister Fenike, 11, and brother Keys, 8, attend elementary school. The elementary school is farther from the camp, a long way to walk for little legs, so some days the younger children get a ride on the back of the elephants trained by the local inhabitants. It is time It is the first time in 3 years that the children attend school, and most of them have fallen far behind the standards for students their age. They now work hard to catch up, knowing that in the Netherlands they will be tested and placed in grade levels according to the results. Sheffy is determined not to be stuck in a class with younger children. When he arrives there, because of his sharp mind and Aunt Cool's secret lessons in the first part of their internment in Camp Lampersary, he is not as far behind as the others and manages to reach the equivalent of a second-year Dutch high school class during 3 months of schooling, right on par with his age level. The routine of school and the freedom the family experiences at the refugee camp after the years of war are welcome gifts. On the weekends, Sheffy and his parents and siblings hike from the camp through the surrounding mountains to a nearby lake. After watching a massive monitor lizard emerge from the bushes to plunge into the water on one of these excursions, Sheffy becomes convinced that there are crocodiles in the lake and refuses to swim there despite his father's reassurance. But he still enjoys sitting on the edge, picnicking with his family. His favorite thing about the camp is movie night, held every Sunday. He has never been to the cinema, and this is a spectacular development in his life, and he and his friends are enthralled by the films of Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart playing out on the giant white screen. Sheffy's favorite movie is Can't Help Singing with Deanna Durbin, a musical that floods him with feelings. The former prisoners are listening to music and making art as their senses reawaken to beauty and emotion that they've had to repress for years just to survive. As a result, rather than the refugee camp being a place of darkness, it is a place of great joy and an intellectual and emotional renaissance for many. I really enjoyed the refugee camp, my father says now. When I asked him about his experience there, I got to join a Boy Scout troop for the camp, which was really fun. I remember how amazing it was that we get free snacks in the recreation building. About 30 to 40 of Mountbatten soldiers ran the camp. I was jealous of those soldiers because all the girls hung around, making eyes at them, and of course I wanted the girls to be interested in me. They really showed off, these British soldiers in their uniforms. He still seems a little sore about it. After 4 months in April 1946, the refugees are put on ships bound for Holland, the ultimate destination for all the evacuees in Camp Candy. My grandfather, as a group leader and medical doctor of the refugees, is given an officer's cabin next to the captain on the SS Wilhelm Rise. He shares it with Sheffy's mother and 3 younger siblings, but quarters are tight, and as a 14-year-old male, Sheffy has to sleep in the troop hold of the ship with about 200 men and boys 14 years or older on canvas bunk cots stacked 4 high. Another converted cargo hold houses around 600 women and younger children. Sheffy and the other teens are assigned jobs collecting and dumping garbage and keeping living quarters clean, as well as assisting in the mess hall, washing dishes. They are paid a small wage for these jobs on the ship. Something new to Sheffy after years of unpaid labor in the internment camps. Each of them gets a ration of 4 packs of Navy-cut cigarettes each week, even the 14-year-old boys. Sheffy gives the cigarettes to his parents, who later give them out as gifts to smokers when they arrive back in Holland. Having little else to offer when they visit relatives and old friends. The SS Wilhelm Rise takes a 6-week-long route through rough and sometimes explosive-mined waters via the Suez Canal, past Greece and southern Europe and onto Holland. Just before entering the Suez Canal, I have a feeling I am mispronouncing that word, but I can't remember how to say that word, so forgive me. The ship docks in Attica, Egypt. There, the passengers disembark and are taken by train in groups to a giant warehouse in an expanse of desert. The heat causing the air to warp in waves. In front of the building, in a surreal scene, a group of Italian prisoners, Mussolini's soldiers captured during the war, play big band music as Sheffy and the refugees file into the warehouse. Inside are long aisles with individual stations of supplies piled high on tables. Each person is to receive 1 item from each station, including a winter coat, a scarf, long underwear, shoes, and a blanket. For the new climate in Europe, All the items have been donated by the American and Canadian welfare organizations to help the refugees get back on their feet. It is the luck of the draw exactly which items each of them is handed, and the children cast jealous glances at one another as they are given bright orange plain plaid coats, while their siblings are given nice grey ones. Still, nobody dares to complain out loud about what they are handed as they walk down the line. Then they file back out of the warehouse, past the Italian band playing Take the A Train, and make the journey back across the desert to the ship. A few days later, they are very grateful for their new clothing as the weather on the ship's decks rapidly shifts from equatorial heat to winter cold past the Gulf of Suez. After Lake Sioux, Gulf of Sioux, something like that. I heard that word, but can't remember what it was. After marveling at the changing landscape as they move through the Suez Canal, Sheffy and the other passengers merge on the other side, cruising through the Mediterranean to the south of Greece and the tip of Italy. Finally, they pass the Rock of Gibraltar and the narrow strait between the tip of the Spain and the north coast of the African continent. Sheffy learns that the rock jutting straight out of the sea is one of the two pillars of Hercules in Greek mythology, the furthest reach of Hercules' 12 labors, and according to Plato, the gate to the realm of the unknown. The William Rue forges right past the rock into the wide Atlantic. When it rounds the coast of Spain, the landscape changes again. Europe feels very close, and one afternoon they slide into Amsterdam's harbor, where hundreds of people stand along the port wall, waving and throwing confetti and welcoming their fellow citizens back to the motherland. My grandfather's brother Jan and Jan's wife Jean are among them. Welcome to the Dutch East Indies side of the family to Europe. Sheffy shakes their hands and looks around him, unsure of what to think. They all take the train to the seaside town, Scheveningen, near The Hague, where Jan and Jean make room in their 2-bedroom apartment for the family of 6 to sleep. In the days following, they arrange for Sheffy and his siblings to attend an Oberbrugge transitional school to prepare for entering the Dutch school system. As they settle in and Sheffy takes in the unfamiliar tall buildings and in a tightly packed country, the gray skies and dirty city pigeons, the bite of cold air he never lived with before, the initial hopelessness he felt as they arrived begins to fade. He doesn't want to say it out loud because he knows he is lucky to be alive, but another unwanted knowledge is settling into his body along with the chill of the North Sea air. He is Dutch, but the Netherlands is not home. Zutphen, Netherlands, 1947. Eventually, Sheffy's family settles in Zutphen, back in Gelderland. Forgive me if I mispronounce those words. Where Sheffy attends high school and drops the childish, i.e., from his name to become Chef. Intelligent, proud, and driven to learn, he had caught up extremely quickly in the transitional school and has now become competitive with the Dutch peers. He's fascinated by physics, math, and especially aeronautics, an interest developed during the years spent looking at the sky during the war, noting the different types of military aircraft, from the Japanese Zeros to the Allied planes that brought news of the prisoners' rescue. On the weekends, he joins other teens in an aeronautic club, building and flying kites and radio-controlled model airplanes. He joins another club an hour away, by bike, where they fly real gliders. He convinces the school headmaster's son to join him, a boy who later becomes a pilot for KLM. Falling out my chair again. Chef finds comfort during these years with his eyes looking down in books or up in the sky. He doesn't really have close friends. A psychologist friend of his father labels him a secondary reactor, someone who is slow to develop relationships. He is slightly introverted. He does make friends superficially in school, but he doesn't try to hold on to them. Mostly he feels isolated and homesick for Indonesia during his teen years. Drang is a Dutch word that is not entirely translatable into English. Loosely, it means an unrelating urge or drive, but the word also carries an implication of deep yearning born of absence. I have this image of a homing pigeon that is released above the ocean. If you tore down its coop, would it fly in confused circles over that spot in perpetuity, never landing, driven by an internal drang of home? Home. Always home. As a teen, my father writes multiple urgent and detailed letters to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, proposing the establishment of a refugee community for them in the tropical climate of Papua New Guinea. He argues that certainly there is uninhabited patch of land there that they can live on, comparing the expelled Dutch Indonesian colonists to the Jews, for whom the homeland of Israeli is officially established during those same years. He writes that he and the Dutch Indonesian colonists need the tropics, that they need a homeland too. They are earnest words from a homesick teenager. He checks the mailbox in their new house in Holland every day for a response, but it never comes. The New Holland is cold and gray and wholly foreign to a boy who is used to running around on bare feet, scaling coconut trees, and eating mangoes on the beach. Having been ignored by Minister of Foreign Affairs and accepting that he will never be able to go back to Indonesia, Chef turns to the next option, the United States. He sees the United States as having saved his life in the war. He reads about America, listens to American music, watches American movies, John Wayne, The American West, The Andrews Sisters, Perry Como, Bing Crosby on the radio, John Steinbeck in warm California with its Pacific Ocean and orange groves, and of course the repeated cliches about America, the American dream, freedom. In America, a person can be anything, achieve any goal. He cannot wait. At 16 years old, Chef tells his parents one weekend that he is going to the glider club with friends. Instead, he cycles all day to the German border because he knows there is an American military base on the other side of it. He plans to stow away on the first plane out of that place. He doesn't know how. He just knows he needs to keep going. At the border, uniformed agents stop him. Passport, they say. Chef blinks. He feels his face go hot. No passport, he says. The agents look at one another amused. They laugh at him. They offer him a cigarette and tell him he can come no further. He declines a cigarette and turns the bike around, begins to cycle back to where he came from, back to the Netherlands, trudging up the school steps in the unfamiliar snow with children he has nothing in common with, wearing hard leather shoes on his feet, watching black crows chatter in the trees instead of cockatoos, bidding his time. The story about stowing away on a military plane baffles me when he first tells me. What are you going to do if you succeeded? I asked him. You must have believed you were going to succeed or you wouldn't have gone. You were really prepared to tell your parents that you were going to fly gliders and then never see them or the rest of your family ever again? Yeah, I don't know. I guess so, my father says. I see in his desperate attempt to leave the extent to which the war took home from him, not just Indonesia or his house, not just his Dutch Indonesian identity, but that deepest sense of home, the home of family and kin and citizenship, the home where you belong to a unit. After years of fending for himself in a men's labor camp, he didn't know how to be a child in a family again. But my father is a persistent creature. He tells his father that he wants to go to America when he finishes high school. He is obsessed with the idea. His parents can't stop him from leaving once he turns 18, and they want him to pursue his goals. So they try to help him. My grandfather calls his brother-in-law, Hank, in Bolivia to ask for advice, because Hank knows a lot of Americans. Diploma in hand, my father prepares to leave the Netherlands, this pit stop between Indonesia and the United States of America. He doesn't feel any sadness leaving his classmates or his house in AFD. I really messed that one up. He feels nothing but eagerness. He's going to do great things, and it isn't going to be in Holland. Every month, ships set off for New York, bringing people to new lives. In the very near future, my father will be one. So I'm just checking the time. In the very near future, my father will be on one of those ships too, on his way to a long life in California, where he will marry and have children. He will build a home. He will carry the war with him, but he will also carry an unfaltering survival mentality, the lessons of self-sufficiency. He will carry the fight across the ocean and into a new world. End of 5.